Hello, everybody, and welcome to the tip of the Ice-Burgh Live, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. And today, the biggest news that anybody could have thought of is here. The Pittsburgh Penguins have placed goaltender Tristan Jarry on waivers. We'll get into all of that means, including what's next for Jarry, what's next for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and who you can expect to make it up to the NHL to replace him in the tandem alongside Alex Nedeljkovic. And then we'll do our typical 3 stars of the week segment. But since we haven't done this in a handful of weeks, then we're going to do a 3 stars of the homestand segment. And then we'll close out this show the same way that we close out every single one of our Wednesday live streams, answering all of your questions if you're tuned in live right now at Tip of the Ice-Burgh on YouTube. Before we get into this, just a quick heads up. I am getting over the flu. So if I don't get to the cough button, I do apologize, but just a quick abrupt heads up before we get into this one. But the Penguins finished off their homestand yesterday, 1-3-1. They dropped to 2-4-3 since the Christmas break. And well, would you look at that? Losing has consequences. The Penguins announced earlier today via social media that they will be placing Tristan Jarry on waivers. Considering it is now 2:01, he has officially been placed on waivers. Let's just say it's been a long time coming for the Penguins netminder. Since his recall earlier in the season from the AHL conditioning stint that the Penguins placed him on, he is 7-7-4 with an .891 save percentage and a 3.00 goals against average. Not only has he been not great since that initial return, it just hasn't been good altogether over his last 10 starts, losing 7 of those 10, including 5 consecutive starts for Tristan Jarry. This is a situation that has been plaguing the Penguins the entire season, and finally it boils over here in the second week of January. Now, when he is sent down, that will be the second time he heads down to the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins this season, saving the Penguins this time $1.15 million against the salary cap, according to Puckpedia. Kyle Dubas spoke to the media shortly ago. According to Josh Getzov, Kyle Dubas had this to say about the entire situation. Quote, "We committed to giving Tristan a good runway. Felt like at this point in time that it's time for Joel Blomqvist to come up here and get a run." It's crazy that it's gotten to this point, but it sounds like this was the plan all along for Kyle Dubas, because at the beginning of the season, Tristan Jarry was, and multiple people called him this, unplayable at the National Hockey League level. He gets sent down during that conditioning stint. The hope there was, hey, he kind of regains his footing, finds his footing a little bit, and then he comes back up and he becomes, well, the Tristan Jarry that the Penguins had hoped he'd been for multiple years. That wasn't the case, so now they had to take another drastic action, and this time it is sending him on waivers, and then eventually, if he gets through waivers, sending him down to the AHL level. Now, this isn't unheard of in the National Hockey League, especially of late, because a similar situation happened just last season with Jack Campbell up with the Edmonton Oilers. He spent the remainder of the year in the minors last year and eventually was bought out following that season. I'm not sure that's the route the Penguins are going to take, but at the same time, you might not have another option. I'm not sure what team in the National Hockey League is going to look at what Tristan Jarry has done over this season and really over last season as well and say that they're going to take a risk on a goaltender that's almost 30 years old, that has 3 years left at $5.75 million on that contract, and that, like we mentioned earlier, is getting ready to spend his second stint at the American Hockey League, that cannot stay at the NHL level over a guy like Joel Blomqvist, who is 21 years old. So I think that when you look at this, the Penguins might not have any other option than to bury this guy in the minors the rest of this season and then potentially explore buying him out next offseason. I know that Kyle Dubas, and this is something that he said a lot during his time with the Toronto Maple Leafs, this is something that he said from the jump when he joined the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. He doesn't like having money on the books. He doesn't like retaining salary. He doesn't like buying out players. And the Penguins in general aren't a fan of buying out players. I believe it's only happened once in the entire Sidney Crosby era. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the Jack Johnson contract. So you look at what the Penguins are dealing with here, it is a very, very unique situation for them, but it's not a unique situation in the league. Jack Campbell, not in the NHL at this point, and Tristan Jarry, who knows, maybe last night was the last we see of him at the NHL level. The Penguins, however, as a team, weren't going to go anywhere without him. So this is 100% the correct move. It felt like this homestand was kind of that final test. Jarry gets 3 of the 5 games as starts. He loses in all 3 of those starts, and especially in those last 2 against Tampa Bay and against Seattle. Only 17 shots on goal, and yet he gives up 3 goals in each game and loses it, especially late in both of those games. So you look at where things stand with Tristan Jarry. I don't know what it's going to take. I don't know if this is a goaltender that can be fixed right now. I mean, right now, that's all he is a broken goaltender. Can he be fixed? I'm not sure, but the Penguins have tried everything possible to give this guy an opportunity throughout the first half of this season, and he just has not responded to basically anything that they've done. So they end up moving on from him, and what does that mean? Well, I thought that maybe it could have meant a little bit of time for Philip Larson, who has been statistically the best goaltender at the American Hockey League level, but instead, according to Kyle Dubas in that quote we mentioned earlier, it's going to be Noel Blomqvist getting a second stint at the NHL level. I'm excited to see what this kid can do because he was impressive in his first stint. The numbers weren't phenomenal, right? He did have over a 900 save percentage, which is a small victory, but considering the goaltending standards that have been set in Pittsburgh this season, that is the best that we have seen so far at the NHL level. But he was also behind that god-awful defense that the Penguins were trotting out there earlier in the season. They haven't fixed it to the point of being one of the best defensive teams, but they are much further along and in a much better place now defensively than they were at the beginning of the season when Noel Blomqvist was getting that first taste of NHL action. He went back down to the American Hockey League. Since then, he is 6-4-2 with a .912 save percentage, a 2.93 goals against average, and 1 shutout. So I'm excited to see him get that other chance behind a much improved defensive team. Now, again, we've seen them late in the third period yesterday, and that was all Mike Sullivan wanted to talk about. They did not play defense. They didn't show any interest in playing defense within their own zone. But I think when you look at where they stand overall, they're in a much better place. And I think that matched with the infusion of young blood in Noel Blomqvist is going to bode well for the Pittsburgh Penguins because, let's face it, they need it right now. Like I mentioned, since Christmas, they have won 2 games out of their 9. They need to turn things around, especially because they're starting to kind of lose ground in that wild card race. If they want to make it to the playoffs, if they want to end that 2-year drought, they needed to do something drastic, especially whenever you look at these games and you say, man, they're in a lot of them. A lot of these are 1-goal games or 1 goal, and then it's separated further by empty nets, as was last night's game and Sunday's game. But they're in a lot of these games. Some of these times they need their goaltender to stand tall late. We saw that against the Edmonton Oilers, one of their few wins over this stretch. It's not that they were dominating down the stretch of that game. In fact, Edmonton, from the second period on, was the much better team. But Alex Nedeljkovic in that game was able to step up and make some big saves, especially late, leading to them holding on to that lead and holding on to that victory. Maybe bringing up a guy like Noel Blomqvist is able to provide that spark, is able to kind of turn things around and get the Penguins back on the winning track, and at least get them onto the winning side of some of these games where, for the majority of the game, they're the better team. They just need a goaltender to bail them out every once in a while. They haven't gotten that through most of the season. Certainly not with Tristan Jarry. Most of the time not with Alex Nedeljkovic. They've gotten it sometimes, though, with him, so that's why I'm glad they're keeping him around for the time being, and we'll see if Noel Blomqvist can kind of bail them out in some of these games, especially on a massive 7-game road trip that they're going to kick off here in 2 days against the Buffalo Sabres. But that's the big news of the day, something that I know a lot of people have been waiting for, but Tristan Jarry sent on waivers. We'll find out in 24 hours if he's claimed. I would be very, very surprised if he gets claimed by one of the 31 other teams. I would imagine he clears, and once he does, as Kyle Dubas stated earlier, the plan is to send him back to the American Hockey League to likely split time with Philip Larson there. And who knows, maybe he'll perform well like he did last time in the AHL, and maybe that just sparks something to where if he gets another chance, which he might not this season, but if he gets another chance, maybe he turns it around. I wouldn't bank on it. I don't think the Penguins are banking on it at this point either. We're going to go to the 3 stars of the homestand, and after that, answer all of your questions. So if you got them, drop them in the chat here. We'll try to get to as many as humanly possible. But let's get to the 3 stars of the homestand. I could go a lot of different ways with this because there were, first of all, 3 players that are playing absolutely amazing on the first line. 2 of them are going to make this list. One of them is not, but just know all 3 of them should probably be on the list, but for a different reason, I went a different way with the 3rd star of the homestand. Let's go with that right now. Kevin Hayes, 5 games played in this homestand, 2 goals, 0 assists. He has 3 goals in the 7 games since he got back into the lineup. He had a slew of healthy scratches, and you wondered, all right, when he gets back into the lineup, what's he going to be able to do? Well, he's meshed really well with a lot of these young Penguins wingers, and it's been kind of a revolving door on that 3rd line for Kevin Hayes. But since the Penguins put him into that role, I feel like it's looked very, very good. Now, they haven't started to score ad nauseum, like they haven't continued to put the puck in the back of the net every other game, but I think Hayes is showing off his playmaking. I think it's working really well with a guy like Drew O'Connor, who seems to be coming along of late since he kind of ended that 30-game plus goalless drought. And I think a large part of that is Kevin Hayes. I mean, the Penguins this year have a lot of young wingers. I mean, Beauvillier's 27, so he doesn't really count, but you look at Phil Tomasino, you look at Cody Glass. These are young guys. Drew O'Connor can be thrown into the same mix. These are guys right now that are benefiting from the way Kevin Hayes is playing the game. So I like what I'm seeing from Kevin Hayes. I think he's played very well since getting put back in the lineup, and it certainly seems to have worked. Whatever conversations Mike Sullivan had with him whenever he was a healthy scratch, it certainly has worked out for the better, because Hayes, who for stretches this season has been this player, has been a good bottom 6 piece for the Penguins, did fade to the back a couple of times, did fade into the background a few times too much. And I think part of that was, for a time, he was on the 4th line with Matt Nieto and Noel Acciari, and I don't think that really meshes well as a line. I don't think that Hayes' style fits what Mike Sullivan wants from that 4th line. So I think he fits a lot better on this team and in Mike Sullivan's system as a 3rd line center. And I think you're starting to see that pay off here over the last couple of games. 2nd star of the week, and again, could go a whole lot of different ways with this, but this is just what I've seen over this homestand. 2nd star of this homestand, 2 goals, 3 assists. I think this guy is playing some of the best hockey of his entire career. We know that he's a sniper. We know that he can finish chances, and he's doing that very well. But what he's showing over the last stretch of games is that facilitating is starting to get on par with the goal scoring. And that has always been something that you've had to question with Bryan Rust. Is he able to figure out how to facilitate as well as he can finish? And right now, he certainly is. And we mentioned the 1st line. We talked about the 1st line. We'll continue to talk about the 1st line because it's one of the best in hockey as of right now. But Bryan Rust is doing everything right now for the Pittsburgh Penguins. He finished that goal last night to put the Penguins up 2-1 against the, I almost said Utah Hockey Club, the Seattle Kraken, same color scheme. And he's really just been playing some good hockey. He's killing penalties. He's cutting back in the defensive zone more so than his line mates are, I would have to say. He's kind of the defensive heartbeat of that line, a line that doesn't play a whole lot of defense. But I've really liked what I've seen out of Bryan Rust over the last couple of weeks. So for that reason, he gets the number 2 star. I'd love to see him continue to keep that facilitating up without it affecting his goal scoring numbers. He has 17 on the season. And once again, he's going to come very, very close if he stays on this pace to that first 30-goal season. I'm not going to say that he's guaranteed to get it, because we all know what happens whenever I say that is something happens and he ends up with 29 goals. But he's having himself another really good season. He's meshing really well with Sidney Crosby, and he's a major, major part of the success of that 1st line, which brings me to the number 1 star of the homestand. The guy is leading the charge on that top line. They are dominating, especially early in games. This line is dominating. And this player has 5 assists, 1 goal in the last 5 games, and recently passed Joe Sakic for 9th all-time on the NHL's scoring leaderboard. That's Sir Sidney Crosby. So 3 stars of the homestand. Kevin Hayes gets the 3rd star simply because I've really liked what I've seen from him since rejoining the Penguins lineup. I think he's given a little bit of life to that third line, and I think he's opening up some opportunities for the Penguins' young wingers. 2nd star of the homestand is going to go to Brian Rust, just a guy that is clicking on all cylinders in every single facet of the game. He is a Mr. Do-It-All for the Pittsburgh Penguins on that top line, and the top star, as is most weeks, is going to be Sidney Crosby. So let me know in the comment section who your 3 stars of the homestand were. And then also, if you got questions, make sure you drop them in. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, answering all of your questions today on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Welcome back to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. And obviously the biggest news of the day, that is going to be Tristan Jarry placed on waivers this afternoon. 24 hours until we find out if anybody claims him. There was a question here asking me if I think anybody will claim him. I find that very, very, very unlikely. And if it happens, I mean, good for the Penguins. Another general manager bailed out their organization, because with 3 years left at $5+ million, I'm not sure the Pittsburgh Penguins are willing to eat that. And I think most NHL franchises are well aware, not to mention the fact that Tristan Jarry at sub 900 save percentage and just continuously losing games from the jump too, not just losing games in the third period, which he has done, but losing them from the jump. Whenever you give up a goal in your first 5 shots on goal, pretty much routinely, and your team has to fight back from down 1-0 or tied 1-1, no matter what, I think that's a pretty damning indictment on your ability to play at this level. So I don't believe that Tristan Jarry will get claimed in the next 24 hours. But let's jump into the questions here, kicking it off with Brandon, who wants to know, how long do you think Ned's leash is after this? Is it Jarry's record plus his personality? Ned's goaltending hasn't been much better. Larson has also been beating at the door. I think Ned's leash is a little bit longer for the simple reason that he at least battles. You know, he can get you wins. He can lead you to wins a little bit more than Tristan Jarry can. And I don't think it has anything to do with Tristan Jarry's personality, because everything that I've heard, and I know outwardly it doesn't feel like Tristan Jarry has that infectious, friendly personality based on his media availabilities. But from everything I've heard, the guys in the room like him. They have no problem with Tristan Jarry. So I don't think it has anything to do with Tristan Jarry's personality. I think it has everything to do with his performance, which has been steadily declining throughout his career, especially post January 1st. And this year just never got off the ground. He has struggled since day one. He was unplayable earlier in the season. And like Kyle Dubas said, they wanted to give him another opportunity here after that, AHL stint where he did play well at the American Hockey League. They wanted to give him a chance to kind of get his feet underneath him at the NHL level, or to see if he can, and he just didn't. So I think that it has everything to do with his record and his performance, nothing to do with his personality. As far as Ned's concerned, I think his leash is pretty long. I think that he's a guy that they might look into trading if Joel Blomqvist comes up here and plays very well and proves to be able to be a 1A or maybe even, a starting caliber goaltender, I think that's going to take a lot because it's going to be a big jump. But hey, never say never. That's what happened with Owen Pickering. He jumped up into the NHL and all of a sudden he looks like a guy that needs no more seasoning at the American Hockey League level. But I think Ned's leash is still a lot longer than Tristan Jarry's was. Let's go to Brandon's second question here, which is, after tonight, Wilkes-Barre doesn't play until the 24th. Any chance anyone comes up to go on the road trip with the big squad? I don't think they're into just bringing a guy up to play on the road trip and then sending him back down. I think the Penguins are, in general, fairly pleased with the play of the skaters on their team. And I think that they just want them to, as a whole, defend better. Because if you look at a lot of these games, they outplayed the Seattle Kraken yesterday. They outplayed the Tampa Bay Lightning for the majority of the game on Sunday. Outside of the game against Ottawa, the Penguins have been playing good hockey. They just haven't been able to finish these games. They haven't been able to close out these games. That's a problem that is lended to itself by just what they're doing on the ice. I don't think there's going to be a player that comes into the lineup. I don't think there's going to be a player that gets called up because of that fact, because of the fact that Wilkes-Barre is not going to play until the 24th. I think they're going to give those guys the time off that they deserve because they've been playing a lot of hockey down there at the American Hockey League level. Let's go over to Austin, who says, does Raquel's chemistry impact his trade status, given how much the Penguins value a great first line? Does Sid's opinion influence any thoughts on moving on from Raquel, given how much he's probably missed playing with 59 Jake Gensel? Raquel's chemistry with Crosby doesn't impact his trade status simply because the Penguins aren't interested in trading Rickard Raquel this season. At least that's what reports are indicating from Josh Yohe of The Athletic, are that the Penguins are not looking to trade Rickard Raquel, or they're unlikely to trade, I should say, Rickard Raquel this season. If that's going to come, it's going to come at the end of the year in the offseason. So I don't think that he ends up getting traded. I think Sid's opinion would influence whether or not Rickard Raquel would get moved on from, but I also don't think Sidney Crosby is going to voice that opinion. He rarely does, and he rarely has ever done that in his career in Pittsburgh, is utilize that influence that he has, but he does have the influence over the organization. If he says something, they will take it into account, and they will take it seriously into account. But I don't think his chemistry impacts his trade value and his trade status, simply because I don't think the Penguins are looking to trade Rickard Raquel, at least as of right now, because they still feel like they have a chance to get into the playoffs, and they're not going to trade away Raquel whenever, that would basically put a nail in the coffin. You never replaced Jake Gensel. If you trade away Raquel, you're probably not going to replace him with the return of that trade, and you're just going to give away another guy that's right now on pace to be a 35 plus, potentially 40 goal scorer if he picks up the pace a little bit. So I don't think Raquel gets traded this year, at least as of right now. Now, if they go out there and lose all 7 of these games on the road trip and all of a sudden they're back in the basement and they're the only team that seems to be out of it in the Eastern Conference, does that change the tune a little bit? Probably, but I also don't think they're going to go out and go over on this next 7-game road trip. Let's go to Evan, who says, do you think this team still needs Noel Acciari? I could be wrong, but I feel like he hasn't performed nearly as well this season as he did last season. It's interesting with Noel Acciari. He's gotten, well, first of all, he's never really gotten the benefit of the doubt from a lot of the fan base, but he has certainly gotten hammered because of Sunday's performance, mainly because of Sunday's turnover to Nikita Kucherov that cost the Pittsburgh Penguins the game in the waning moments. Do I think the team still needs a player like Noel Acciari? Yes, but he needs to be better. He needs to be much better. I think earlier this season, Noel Acciari was playing at a higher level than he did all of last year, but we have not seen that version of Noel Acciari in a very long time. Right now, what the Penguins are banking on with their fourth line, at least what they were banking on with that fourth line when it remained consistent for the longest time, and it was Nieto, Lizotte, and Acciari, was they're just going to get the puck, they're going to transfer it from the defensive zone to the offensive zone, and they're just going to try to hold the puck there for their entire shift while everybody else gets a breather on the bench. And they had been doing that at a pretty high level. The problem with that is, whenever you start to make those mistakes, you're not making up for it enough in the offensive zone. You're not scoring. Noel Acciari hasn't scored in a very, very long time. Blake Lizotte has gone cold on the goal scoring front because he's playing with Noel Acciari, and for the longest time was playing with Matt Nieto on the other side of him. At some point, especially whenever things are getting tight in the standings race, people are going to look for a little bit more. Noel Acciari has kind of fell off a little bit. Now, part of that is he plays very physically demanding style of hockey. The guy has been high-sticked in every game for the past 2 weeks and seems to have to go down and get stitches or get checked out by the training staff every 2 weeks or every 2 minutes or 2 shifts because he does things that other players on the Penguins don't do. Do I think there is room for a player like Noel Acciari on the Penguins? Yes. Do I think they need a player like Noel Acciari? Yes. They need somebody that's going to block those shots. They need somebody that is going to be the bell cow when it comes to shorthanded ice time from the forward position. They need somebody that's going to be physical. They need somebody that is going to be able to make the smart plays to get the puck from your defensive zone in a defensive faceoff situation quickly up ice and force the other team to play in their own zone. When he's at his best, that's what he does, and the Penguins have space for that. Every team in the NHL needs a player like that, needs a line like that. The problem is Noel Acciari hasn't been performing very well over the last 2 weeks. Do I think he's going to be afforded opportunities? Yes. I don't think he's going to be a guy. I mean, there have been mentions here. Acciari is the guy that turned the puck over. Matt Nieto is the guy that ended up eating the healthy scratch yesterday because this team, this coaching staff, this organization loves Noel Acciari. They know what he does for them. They like what he does for them, and they're going to continue to give him opportunities to break out of the slump that he's currently in. Does he need to sit for a game or two? Maybe. I mean, shoot, we talked earlier in the episode. That worked for Kevin Hayes, right? We talked earlier in the season. That worked for, I was going to say Matt Grzelcyk. It didn't work for Matt Grzelcyk. He just got sent down in the lineup and then coincidentally found a spot with Erik Karlsson, and it ended up working. But could he potentially use a couple days off? Yes. Do I think they're going to give it to him? Maybe, but they're certainly going to make sure that for the most part, he stays in this lineup throughout the remainder of the season. I know that's not the answer that you wanted, Evan. That's just what I feel like is going to end up happening. Let's go to IR3K, who says, I think not enough people have been talking about how good Erik Karlsson has been lately. He seems dialed in and committed. What are your thoughts? I wholeheartedly agree. We're going to talk tomorrow on a full episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh about how this defense has settled in very well. At least the blue line has settled in very well, and each player is playing with somebody that seems like they mesh very well with. I would have never in a million years been able to tell you before it started happening that Matt Grzelcyk with Erik Karlsson would benefit Erik Karlsson and bring out the best in Erik Karlsson that we've seen since he joined the Penguins. But that's where we're at. I mean, it was a kind of marriage by necessity because of all the injuries that occurred for a 2-week span. But Grzelcyk with Karlsson, for some reason, has just worked. Now, defensively, does it still give me the heebie-jeebies? Yes. Every time they're out there on the ice, it bothers me a little bit. But Grzelcyk has gotten much better in his own zone, playing alongside Erik Karlsson. Part of that might just be, again, necessity. When you're playing with Erik Karlsson, you need to be at the top of your game in the defensive zone because Karlsson has a tendency to forget that that's the position that he plays sometimes. So maybe because of that, Matt Grzelcyk has started to figure things out a little bit more in his own zone. But I think overall, with that pairing, you're looking for offense. You're looking for consistent playmaking. And that's what you're getting right now, especially from Erik Karlsson. I don't know what it is about those two together, but it has sprung something in Erik Karlsson. He has had a very, very productive stretch here over the last probably 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe even a full month with Matt Grzelcyk. He's been very good. Look no further than the pass he made to Brian Rust last night. Absolute rocket of a pass that a lot of people in this league cannot make. Tape to tape. It was a wide open net for Brian Rust, and he is a great goal scorer, but that could have been anybody. That could have been anybody shy of Noel Acciari the way he's playing right now, and that would have ended up in the back of the net. Those are the types of plays that Erik Karlsson is making, and I think you see it with his confidence as well. He's shooting the puck more. He's carrying the puck up ice more. He's carrying the puck into the offensive zone more, and that's when he's at his best, and I think you're seeing him at his best here for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Let's go over to Brandon, who wants to know, do you think... Sorry, I'm just going to grab a couple more of these questions here. Says, do you think Dubas capitalizes on any of the rising stock of the one-year show-me deals? Guys like a Beauvillier and a Grzelcyk certainly could fetch something at the deadline. Perhaps even Hayes could. Hayes is a tough one because I believe he has 1 year left on his contract after this one, and this was a kind of show-me year for Kevin Hayes, and 10 points isn't, in my opinion, enough to kind of show me for $3.57 million that he's going to be a trade deadline piece that is going to be coveted by many teams. So I think you can probably rule Hayes out, and that's fine by me. I don't think that the Penguins need to move on from Kevin Hayes. They got him in a salary cap dump, so getting rid of him in any way, shape, or form to get another piece would be a good piece of asset management for the Penguins. But like I said, I think he's doing some very good things in the lineup. And I think that keeping a veteran in the middle of the ice when you have a lot of young wingers, and you have a lot of young wingers that might be coming up in the pipeline right now in the AHL, Koivunen, Tristan Bros, if he moves over to the wing, Ponomarev moves over to the wing, then he could play with Kevin Hayes. But having Hayes there as a veteran playmaker, even though he doesn't have the foot speed anymore, I kind of like that sticking around. But I do think Kyle Dubas is going to look to try to capitalize on some of these one-year show-me deals. Grzelcyk is a tough one. Obviously, we had all talked about it for a long time. Man, if you can get Grzelcyk off of this team, get Grzelcyk off of this team. But right now, he's bringing the best out of Erik Karlsson. Do you really want to mess with that? I mean, yeah, you could always put Marcus Pettersson back with Karlsson, but that duo wasn't working well this year. Certainly wasn't working as well as right now Grzelcyk and Karlsson are. So you might have to be careful with that. You might have to try to, especially if you're still in the playoff race, you might end up keeping on, hold on to Grzelcyk. Beauvillier, possibly, but at the same time, what's his trade value? Like, I could see him being traded for a 6th round pick at the deadline if a contending team really wants him, and the Penguins are saying, well, we still want to get some picks. We still want to kind of maneuver things around. And especially if they want to create a roster spot for some of those names that I said earlier, you know, a McGroarty, Ponomarev, a Koivunen, or a Bros, maybe that's where you look to trade away a guy like Anthony Beauvillier. I think that, you know, it's not a 1 year show me deal. It's the second year of a 2 year contract, but I still think Drew O'Connor's a name that's going to come up a lot in the next month and a half leading into the trade deadline. So I do think Kyle Dubas is still going to look to trade away pieces, because I still think he is in the mindset of collecting as many picks and prospects as possible to kind of fortify the chest heading into this retool into year 2, because this is year 1 of it, or maybe even year 2 if you want to consider, you know, kicking it off last season with the trade of Jake Gensel. But this is the first full year of that retool where they're trying to make the playoffs, but they're still trying to acquire pieces and prospects for the future. I think that he's going to have that mindset going into the trade deadline still, of course. Let's go to Libby, who's checking in for the first time on this live. Says, could the Penguins be in the running for JT Miller? To me, that is a move that makes absolutely no sense. And it's nothing against you. It's everything against JT Miller and where he's at in his current, you know, part of his career. Because if you're looking at the Penguins right now, all these trade pieces that we've talked about that they could go after are young pieces and young players that could help not just this year, but for years to come. JT Miller is 31 years old and is in year, I believe, 2. Let me bring it up here on Puckpedia. Year 2 of a 7-year contract that pays him $8 million. I'm not touching that. I'm not touching that deal at 31 years old. This is a guy that, yeah, when he's at his best, he puts the puck in the back of the net a lot. Is he a really good player? Of course. The Penguins right now are in a group of about 8 or 9 teams fighting for 1 or 2 playoff spots. And even if they make it, have they shown anything to make you believe that they are going to go out there and win 4 series and claim the Stanley Cup? No. They're not in a position right now to go out and swing big for a guy like JT Miller and go bring in a guy who's on a 7-year contract at $8 million. Even though there's always been the rumors between Vancouver and Pittsburgh, even though there have previously been rumors about JT Miller, I think the time has just passed on that one. I just don't think that they're going to be in the running. They shouldn't be in the running, at least, for a guy like JT Miller. Now, if they go up to try to get Nils Höglander off of Vancouver, I would say that makes a little bit of sense. If they try to go get Nick Robertson out of Toronto, I would say that makes more sense. If they try to go get Trevor Zegras, who we talked about last week, out of Anaheim, that makes more sense. I just don't see going to get another 30-plus-year-old that's on a massive contract to try to be a Band-Aid for a group right now that is shifting to the future. Bringing him in, it just goes against everything that Kyle Dubas has done over the past 5-6 months with this franchise. Let's go to Evan here, who says, do you think Pickering should be getting more minutes? He looked comfortable and steady on the first line with Letang for that period of time. I think Pickering can handle more minutes, but I don't have any issue with him and Joseph being the third pairing. I think those two have kind of formed a quick chemistry together, and I think those two have had some pretty good success together. Now, would I like to see Pickering become a top 4 defenseman for the Penguins at some point? Yeah, but I'm not rushing that. The guy's what, 20 years old? Is he even old enough to drink in the U.S. right now? Owen Pickering age? I don't think he is. I think he's still 20. Yeah, he's 20 for the next 12 days. So on this road trip, he'll get to turn 21. That'll, I'm sure, be an interesting night. But he's 20 years old right now. I'm not rushing it with Owen Pickering. I think right now, the way that the Penguins defense has worked out, I think you're pretty good to let this run for a stretch of time and see if they can't just find some consistency there. Pettersson and Letang obviously have always had chemistry. Letang hasn't gotten to play with Pettersson much since Karlsson came to Pittsburgh. This is an opportunity to let Letang and Pettersson just kind of cook on that first pairing. Karlsson, Grzelcyk, we've talked about a lot on this episode. They've worked well together, and the way Karlsson's playing, you're going to give him as much ice time as possible because he's creating so much to the offensive side of the ice. And that leaves Pickering and Joseph as your third pairing. Joseph finally being allowed to be a consistent third pairing guy, and that's the role that he should be in, and he's finding success. And Owen Pickering being an NHL guy, a guy that I didn't expect to play over 20 plus games of NHL experience this year. And yet here he is, making it seem like he's not going back to the AHL anytime soon, if at all. So I don't have any issue with him playing third pairing minutes because I know the future is going to be more and more. And it's nice to see that when those injuries occurred, when Letang went down and he had to step up, when Pettersson went down and Pickering had to step up, that he could handle 24, 25 minutes a night. But that doesn't mean that you have to force feed him minutes. So I'm perfectly fine with him sticking with the third pairing minutes for the time being. I don't have very many complaints about the way the Penguins have deployed their defense over the past couple of weeks. Let's go to Nathan's question here, who asks, do you think the Penguins have a chance at Mikko Rantanen if he doesn't get signed? Again, I don't think they're going to go out for any of these big names. I really don't. Now, Mikko Rantanen, if he's available, is obviously going to be atop the NHL free agency board this offseason. But again, are you going to pay $10 million to Mikko Rantanen next year? Does Mikko Rantanen want to come to Pittsburgh? Or does he want to go somewhere where he's going to compete? Because he's been in Colorado, which has been competitive ever since he really became one of their stars. Does he want to compete more? If he does, I'm not sure he'd come to Pittsburgh. But, do I think they have a chance at him? I think they'll have the money, especially if they figure out a way to get, Tristan Jarry's money off the books and they end up going young with Joel Blomqvist. They'll have the money to do it. They might go after him, but again, if you're a superstar right now, do you want to go to Pittsburgh? That's, I think, a big question mark going forward. And I'm not sure that a guy like Rantanen would. Let's go over to Christopher, who says, I haven't heard anyone complaining about Graves. Is he still on the team? He is, but he just isn't playing. He isn't. And when he does play, he doesn't play horrible. He just isn't playing very much. Right now, the Penguins are set on defense, like I mentioned, with the 6 guys that they have. And because of that, Ryan Graves has been eating a heck of a lot of nachos. And that's going to continue to be the case unless, an injury happens or unless somebody falls off the face of the earth. But right now, I don't think he's even close to getting in the lineup because I don't think there's anybody that is close to losing their lineup spot among the 6 defensemen that the Penguins are currently running out there. But nobody's complained about him. It's hard to complain about a guy who's not doing anything. Now, you can probably say, you're paying a lot of money for a guy to sit on the bench, but you're going to pay a lot of money for that guy anyway this year. It's better if he's not hurting you like he was last year. But yeah, he's still on the team. He's still on the NHL roster. He's just not on the ice at all. Let's go to the next question here. Would you bring up Boris Katchouk? Again, I just don't know where you'd put him in the lineup. I mean, would you put him on the fourth line? He's been a really good goal scorer for the AHL Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, but if you bring him up and put him on the fourth line and play him in those fourth line minutes with a Noel Acciari, with a Matt Nieto, with a Blake Lizotte, are you expecting the goal scoring to turn around? If you play him with Anthony Beauvillier, do you really think that he's going to kind of continue that at the NHL level? No, I don't see right now a place where somebody from the AHL can come up and go in, because I think the Penguins are trying to figure out a lot about Phil Tomasino. They're trying to figure out a lot about Cody Glass, who maybe this injury, he's day-to-day right now. He missed practice today. Maybe that injury opens up an opportunity for somebody. But do they still want to give Jesse Puljujärvi more opportunities? He got those couple of games. He didn't look awful, didn't look phenomenal. But again, do you want to give him a larger stretch of games here to prove whether or not he deserves another chance? Who knows? But I don't think there is a spot right now for Boris Katchouk, even though he is playing very well at the American Hockey League level. Let's go to Ryan, who says, what could you see as a return for Marcus Pettersson? I think it starts with a second, and depending on how many teams get involved, because as the only names we've heard as of right now, and this is per Elliot Friedman, Edmonton Oilers and Vancouver Canucks. Both of those teams are known for being slightly desperate when it comes to the trade deadline. The Oilers simply because, well, they went to the Stanley Cup last year, and when you have McDavid, you do desperate things to get him the best team possible going into the playoffs. For Vancouver, it's the Jim Rutherford effect. Even if he's not the GM, I know Patrick Alvin is the GM up there. It's a Jim Rutherford team. They're going to go all out to get the players that they want. If that is Pettersson, who they have coveted for a while, and they get into a kind of a bidding war, I could see that price tag going up to a first-round pick or a prospect that is kind of on that same level, like a B+ to A- prospect for a Marcus Pettersson. Either way, I think it's going to be multiple pieces, but you can't get too crazy because he is on an expiring deal. I think that Pettersson, even in a down year, is a defenseman that is going to be near the top of the trade list when it comes to late February, early March, because this is a guy that can move the puck well. This is a guy that kills penalties well. This is a guy that over the last 2 years has shown that he can get into the offensive side of the ice and play that well as well. So I think that this is a guy that it starts with a second and a prospect, and depending on how things go, it could turn into a first and a prospect. And if it goes up to a first, you'd have to imagine the prospect comes down a little bit. And then maybe if it's Vancouver, maybe you have Nils Höglander in there as well. Again, maybe 3 pieces is a bit too much, but I think the Penguins get a very high draft pick and a decent prospect to start that conversation for Marcus Pettersson, no matter who is on the other side of those trade conversations. Let's go down to Libby, who says, who do you want in the number 1 goalie spot? I mean, right now, if you're going to actually label it, and you have to label it, I want Alex Nedeljkovic in that number 1 spot. I want Joel Blomqvist in the number 2 spot, and the way that he's playing, I don't think Tristan Jarry should get another shot at the NHL level this year. I just don't see the reasoning behind it, because this is a guy that has shown you over his entire season and late last season that he's just not equipped to play at this level right now. So I don't know what more you need to see from him. With that being said, I would have Alex Nedeljkovic as 1A, and then I would have Joel Blomqvist as 1B, with the opportunity that they just switch, because Blomqvist looked good early in the season. He looked like he still needed a little bit of seasoning in the AHL. Now that he's got that, what does he look like the rest of the season? He could come up and be, Owen Pickering 2.0, and everybody could say, all right, well, this kid doesn't need to go back to the AHL ever again. He's a guy, and the Penguins can just hit the ground running with that. That would be great. But until we see that with our eyes at the NHL level, I'm going to say Alex Nedeljkovic is the number 1 goalie for right now, with Joel Blomqvist as the number 2. Let's go to John, who says, Zegras makes perfect sense. Maybe Drew O'Connor going the other way. Honestly, anyone not named Sid should be in play for trade. Also, any chance Sullivan is gone after this season? I think you have to see how the year plays out. It's a very similar conversation with Mike Sullivan. It's hard to believe the Penguins would end up firing him unless they fall very short of expectations. The expectations this year were to be exactly where they're at. A team that is within striking distance of the playoffs and might be able to scratch their way into the playoffs, but is not expected to do a whole lot once they get there, and they're not expected to finish in the top 3 in the division. As of right now, have they fallen super short of expectations this season? No. Have certain players fallen short of expectations? Yeah, Tristan Jarry has. But how much of that are you going to place on the shoulders of Mike Sullivan? This team has gone on a losing streak here, and yeah, when that happens, the coach typically starts to get a little bit of heat, especially when the coach hasn't won a playoff series since 2018. But I do think that that's a conversation that you need to have at the end of the season. I think as of right now, it doesn't feel like the seat's too hot for Mike Sullivan. As far as Zegras and O'Connor, I think you need to send a little bit more that way, because even though Anaheim doesn't seem too interested in utilizing Trevor Zegras as part of their future plans, he's still a big piece for them, and a piece that they're going to need to be paid for to give up on, because he was supposed to be, initially, he was supposed to be one of their star players. The fact that it hasn't worked out, there's a little bit of pride there. So they're going to want something in return to have to give up on a player that at one point they thought was going to be the future of their organization. So I think O'Connor does fit, because I think that O'Connor fits exactly what Pat Verbeek and the Anaheim Ducks are wanting to turn into in the future. But I think you'd have to add a little bit more to get Trevor Zegras. And I think it's worth it. You know, it's kind of the same thing whenever you acquired Rucker McGroarty, is saying, yeah, I mean, you might have to pay a hefty price for it. You had to pay your top prospect to get Rucker McGroarty. But in the end, is it better for you now and in the future? Yes. I think Trevor Zegras adds a top 6 threat that the Penguins are right now missing. I think that they have a great first line. I think that Evgeni Malkin, when he's on his game, is great. I think Michael Bunting has been a dog on a bone in recent weeks and has been playing some of the best hockey that I've seen him play. But I do think they're missing that other scoring forward in the top 6. Trevor Zegras is that. And now he's trying to be a much better 200-foot player this season, and that's cost him his offensive numbers. And then, of course, he's dealing with this injury that he's trying to come back from. But that timetable's coming up real soon. You'd imagine at some point, maybe right after the Four Nations faceoff, he's ready to come back, and that lines up with trade deadline season. So maybe Zegras ends up being that piece, and maybe he can be your second line center moving forward if you want to move Malkin, or he could just be a second line winger and you put him next to Malkin and let those two cook. Let's go down to Georgia, who says, I know you always have a hard on for Karlsson, which I don't. But I've certainly enjoyed watching him be the Hall of Fame level player that he can be for the last couple of weeks, which he wasn't the first year and a half here. But isn't the truth just that it's about time he started earning the money he gets? You can say that about a bunch of players across the NHL. Right now, he's doing it. When he's playing like this, that's what he's getting paid $10 million for. When he's creating offensively and he is not gashing you consistently in the defensive zone. So a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people don't like that he's a defenseman that doesn't play great defense. You have to get over it. That's just the way that it is with him. If you want him to play defense and that's how you're going to measure him being a $10 million player, then you might want to watch a different team, because he is never going to be a good defensive player. He's not going to score 100 points also. That was a 1-year thing that happened because he was playing on the worst team in the league, and he was able to go out there and do whatever he wants. He's having to play in some kind of system now, so that's going to take away from him scoring 100 points. But he's still right now scoring at, I believe, a 70-point pace over the last couple of weeks. If he's doing that, he's earning his money. If he's creating offensively, he's earning his money. If the Penguins have a top 5 power play in the NHL, he's earning his money. People need to lighten it up a little bit. I know he had a bad first year, and he did, and we murdered him for it. We gave him all the crap in the world for how bad he was last season throughout most of the year and early this season too. But if you're watching him lately and you have the same opinion as you did last year, then you just are too blinded by your hate for him to give him credit whenever he's playing at the top of his game. Let's go to Jason, who says, which contract is worse, Tristan Jarry or Ryan Graves? One of them is playable at the NHL level right now. One of them is not. Neither of them are good. Neither contract is good right now. But Tristan Jarry's is far worse because you cannot play him at the NHL level. Right now, Ryan Graves, you can play him third pairing minutes. Now, is he getting paid way beyond a third pairing guy? Yeah, he is. But you can play him, and it's going to be NHL quality play. Maybe not great, but it'll be good NHL quality play on the third pairing. Tristan Jarry, what we've seen from him is just not good NHL quality play. He cannot play at this level right now. And for that, it's going to be harder to move him. Also because of the goaltending position. There's only so many spots that each team has for a goaltender. So if you're going to take on a goalie, he has to be pretty good. Penguins aren't going to be able to trade Tristan Jarry. They might be able to offload Graves because a team, they lost the opportunity to do that with the Utah Hockey Club. They were taking on a bunch of defensemen this year. They were taking on a bunch of salary this year. And obviously Graves was playing too bad to be considered in that. But if he starts playing better, that's an easier contract offload than a goaltender that isn't playing at the NHL, that isn't playing at an NHL level. Let's go to and finish off with Pittsburgh fan 412, who says, do you start Blomqvist on Friday against Buffalo or Saturday against Washington? It's a back-to-back. He's going to start in one of them. I would imagine that he gets the start against Buffalo. And I would do that too. So I agree with you, Pittsburgh fan 412, because making the jump back from AHL to NHL, Buffalo is a team, again, they could come out and play better than the Washington Capitals play against the Penguins. They can. But I think if you look at what they are as a whole this season, Buffalo is the worst of the two teams. So I give Joel Blomqvist the first day against Buffalo, and I give Ned that second game against Washington. Also because the way Ned was able to play against Edmonton, I think because of that, you give him the tougher challenge, and the tougher challenge is going to be going down to Cap One and taking on the Washington Capitals. That is going to be, that's a wrap for today's episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe to our channel, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.